So. Good morning, everybody. My name's Chris. I have the privilege of being the evangelist here for the church in Salt Lake, and this is the sermon they said was impossible to preach because we have carne asada wafting through the pavilion while we're trying to open up the Bible and concentrate on something of a more deep fashion. But I'm going to endeavor to do my best, although I know that it is a miracle of food waiting under those tents for us. And if I am long-winded, some of it might go bad, so I'm a little motivated there. Before we get started, though, a very special brother to the church here. It's his last Sunday, him and his family. He's serving our country in the military. He's moving up to Alaska. Morgan, if you just stand, we just want to say thank you so much for your service and being with us. And we have the kids and his lovely wife until the 1st of August. They'll be here and then just literally taking the trailer and things that day up to Alaska. Thanks for your service and thanks for your faith and just being part of the church here. One other thing, for those of you who don't know, Kim and I, where's my better half? I have to have eye contact or I fall apart. No, there she is. We moved here from Sweden about 8 weeks ago. And I wanted to just give a little cheer to the church back there from you guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a couple words in Swedish to them about what this is, and then I'm going to turn it around and you just say, "We love you." Okay? You guys, can we practice that though? We love you. Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to say a little in Swedish so they understand what is this, because it doesn't look like a church, right? You got mountains over here, you got dogs over here, we got food going on over here. This looks like a folk fest in, Germany or something. But here it is. So, wait a minute. I'm taking a picture of Fran. That's not supposed to happen. I'm a tech noon. Yeah, there I am. Okay. Hej till mina kära församling I Stockholm. Det är jag här, Christopher, ute I parken med vår kära församling I Salt Lake City. Vi har en speciell söndag som kallas för carne asada, som är mycket kött och mycket picknick. Men jag vill skicka en hälsning för dina bröder och systrar här, och de har någonting att säga till er. We love you! Vi saknar er, älskar er. Be för oss, vi ber för er. Hej. Okay, thank you so much. There we go. Okay, if you haven't been here before, we're doing a series called Discover God. It's been my experience that, myself included, many people have kind of a twisted picture of God, or a very small picture of God, or no picture at all. Where we just came from, most people were atheists, so we had to do studies like this as this fly is swarming around me all the time. But if you haven't been with us before, you're going to understand this anyway, because we pick up a new characteristic of God every week. This time we're going to talk about the greatness and the personableness of God. The greatness and the personableness of God. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's often when you meet somebody who's truly great, they're either an incredibly great athlete, they might be incredibly intelligent, extremely wealthy, famous, a person of greatness. It's not often that same person would also be personable and take time for even the small and the weak and the not noticeable people. But what you find in God, the God of the Bible, is that God is in fact the greatest being in the entire universe, at the same time the most personable in the entire universe. I don't assume that everybody here is a Christian today. I'm used to speaking that at least a third of the group are atheists. So for those of you who are not even sure what you think about God, we'll get to why I think there is a God. A little bit of evidence in every one of the things I try to preach about. But the first thing we're going to talk about is just this side of the greatness of God. If you can open to Isaiah 40. I did not tell Alyssa and Carson to go to Isaiah 40, but we do believe that if a service is run right, it's orchestrated not by people, but by the Holy Spirit. There it is. Isaiah chapter 40. If you don't have a Bible today, don't feel weird or out of it. Just snuggle up to the person next to you. We believe in snuggling in this church, especially with mobile phones where you have to get kind of extra close to look at the Bible on electronic format. And for those of you who don't like being so close, then that's a tip for you to bring a paper Bible for once in your life so that you can hold it at a distance. I believe in the paper Bible. I know I'm old and I'm a Neanderthal, but that's okay. All right. Okay, we're in Isaiah 40, but greatness, I've experienced, all of us, it's a really interesting discussion to get to know people better. If you sit around in a circle, maybe around a campfire or something, and you say, have you ever had a touch with greatness, something or some person or event that was great, and hear what people look at as the greatest things in their life, or something of greatness? I thought of three things. Any baseball fans here? Yeah. Carson? Okay, wow. Okay, so this example, this example will fall totally flat. But no. Many years ago, I had the privilege of living in Baltimore, and the Orioles are a fairly known baseball team. I was in the stadium when Cal Ripken Jr., whose nickname baseball is Iron Man because he actually played for 21 seasons in Major League Baseball, but when he broke Lou Gehrig's 56-year-old record of most consecutive starts in the major leagues, 2,131 games. And I was there for that. And I remember I was just getting into baseball. I didn't really know much about it. I'm a soccer and rugby player, so I thought baseball is kind of boring as dirt. Nothing happens for forever, But I was totally shocked. It was a no-hitter, and Cal gets up there. The guys before him, when they were about ready to hit the ball, they're swinging the bat around. They're doing all kind of fancy stuff, And Cal gets up there. He takes off his hat because everybody's applauding him, and he's like bald. I'm like, this guy's ancient. I mean, now I can relate that you can be bald and still have some years left, But I saw him, I'm like, how can this guy, it's one of the hardest things in sports to hit a baseball pitch by a major league pitcher, So he gets up there, he's not doing any of this fancy stuff. He's standing upright, has the bat laying on his shoulder. I'm like, that's even a lame stance. What's going to, first ball comes in, fastball, 104 miles an hour strike. He didn't even move. I'm like, okay, they're just keeping this guy in to make the record, The next ball comes, fastball, strike two. I'm like, oh. Third one comes, he steps before the guy even lets go of the ball. Wham! Upper deck, home run with two guys on base. That was when I fell in love with baseball. Like, a moment of greatness. Cal. And see, you guy's ancient, but if he can hit like that, he could just jog around the bases, waving his hat at everybody, The early 90s, I went to a conference and actually played in a soccer tournament in South Africa. And at the airport, I met a gentleman named Desmond Tutu. Some of you know who he is. He is a South African cleric who was famous for human rights and one of the main people who got rid of apartheid. But he also negotiated a multiracial democracy in South Africa, and he led what was called the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. Instead of massacring each other and having a civil war, much thanks to his endeavors, and just a few other people, but pretty much him, he was able to take South Africa into a democracy. And they have their problems now, but it could have been so much worse. Yeah. And I met him at the airport, and I had one other guy with me, a guy named Walter, and we walked up. I said, you're Desmond Tutu. Yes, I am. And who are you? He wanted to know all about me. And while I'm here, who cares about me? I just want to say thanks for all that you're doing. And we probably had a 10-minute conversation. And he was in like some kind of festal robes and everything else. I was like so impressed with this guy. Classical music fans here? Any classical music? Okay, I'm still trying to figure out what this church likes, because everything I like is like 3 people in the whole church like it. Carne asada. Okay. So, many years ago, my first education was to be a violin maker, which is a really cool job, but unfortunately, it doesn't pay the bills. So after 3 years of education, and I worked another year or so in that, I went on to to study engineering. But during that time, the gentleman who taught me how to make violins was considered the best living maker in America. And so he would get really high-end violins to repair and to restore. And at one point in time, we got in a real Stradivarius violin that was made in 1713, that he had to restore certain parts of it. And when it got done, he let me play on it for 10 minutes. So that to me, that for me was a moment of greatness. And yes, they sound as amazing as they're purported to sound. So, we have brief moments from greatness, but When we think of God, do we get as wild as hearing about playing a Stradivarius? You know, we almost revel in our own moments of greatness, and because we've experienced them, they seem greater maybe than the God of the Bible. When in fact, the greatest thing that you could possibly ever do is come in contact with this God and get to know him personally. Isaiah chapter 40, we're going to hop down to verse 12. And in order to really get to understand the greatness of God, you've got to do at least two things, probably more than this, but at least two that I know of. One, you have to remove from your own thoughts limits that make him small. And you can tell if you have areas of your life you worry in and you actually claim to believe in God, you're saying that God is smaller than your problems. Or God doesn't help me in that area of my life, right? So we have to work really, really hard at removing from our thoughts limits that make God small. The second step we have to do, and there might be more, but at least these two, compare God with powers and forces that you regard as great. You know, there are certain things that, you know, when you're around a strong person or you see somebody in the gym, you're like, whoa! You know, when you compare God to a guy who can bench press 450, how much can God bench press? I mean, it's a ridiculous question. Infinite. That was absolutely the right answer. You know, this man is paying attention in the front row. I appreciate that. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions during the... get some insights myself here. Okay, so we're gonna try and do that. I'm literally only going to look at a few verses in Isaiah 40. There are 66 books here that you can look into. We're going to look at a couple sentences. Isaiah 40, if you look down in verse 12, this is the first one we're going to do to try to get a picture of his greatness. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breath of his hand marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? We can stop there. There's several things, just that one verse we're going to take a look at here. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? I mean, not even the whole hand, but just this little section here in the center. That's the hollow of not even your whole hand, okay? What does that mean? Let's just take the Mariana Trench, for example. The deepest water on earth. It's over 36,000 feet deep. It's almost 7 miles deep of water. That's the deepest we have on the earth. The water covers about 71% of the earth's surface. 360 million cubic miles of water are on the earth. Now, the amazing thing about that, first off, that God can measure that in his hand. That's pretty blow away. But that doesn't say a whole lot. Those numbers are so big, we're sitting here kind of fogged over, waiting for carne asada. So let me make it a little more practical. Only 0.5% of all the water on the earth is available for us as fresh water. So 99.5% of all the water on the earth is not available to us. We're surviving on that 0.5%. Does anybody have any idea how many gallons of water that is per person? 0.5%? Wild guess? 0.5% of all the water on earth leaves us with still 2.2 million gallons of water per person. Wow. Did God oversupply or what? And certainly everybody should have access to clean drinking water. And I think that should be an interest even for Christians to really try and help that happen around the world. But there's enough out there, 2.2 million gallons per person, and that's only 0.5% of all the water available on earth. He measures that in the hollow of his hand. Pretty incredible. Now, there's another side to it, because God is amazing just also in the big, but also in the really, really, really small. So if you were to take about 2 swallows of water in your mouth from your water bottle there, you would have the number 60 with 23 zeros after it, number of water molecules in just 2 swallows of water. Okay, that doesn't mean anything to you either. Glazing over once again, thinking of carne asada. Okay, so you know, take a ream of paper, 500 sheets of paper, roughly 2 to 3 inches thick, okay? If you were to stack reams of paper end to end, the number of water molecules in just 2 swallows of water, that stack would reach from Earth to the sun, back and forth, exactly 1 million times. That's how many water molecules are in 2 swallows of water. And the complicatedness of a water molecule, the way the angles are and everything else, how when it freezes it's less dense and all that, we would not even be here. Life would not be here. So you have this huge, huge expanse of water, 2.2 million gallons per person, all in the hollow of his hand. And then he goes inside of that to the molecule level, and he puts more molecules there than there are, almost stars in the entire galaxy in 2 swallows of water. From the smallest to the most infinite, the greatness of God. We're not done with verse 12. This is just one verse. I'm trying to make a point. One verse, okay? What else does he say in verse 12? Or weighed the mountains on the scales. You want to do something stupid, try to Google the weight of an average Rocky Mountain. I know because I tried it, and it's like, what are you, stupid? Came up, no. Okay, so I thought, what's probably a way to break this down better? Most of the mountain, though not all, but most of it is granite, okay? 1 cubic foot of granite, how much does it weigh? 175 pounds. The weight of an average full-grown male in America, 1 cubic foot of granite. How many cubic feet are we looking at? Wow. And God weighs them in his scales. First off, I know that's picture language, but can you imagine how big that scale would be? Well, 455 trillion just for like the peak of that one mountain. Incredible. You got to take these limits away from God. I'm still not done with verse 12, okay? Look in verse 14. That's what I wanted to go to. Verse 14. The greatness of God. What does it say here? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him, and who taught him the right way? Who was it that taught him knowledge or showed him the path of understanding? I've been out of the country a while, so I don't know if you still have to take the SAT test to get into university. Do you have to? Something like an SAT? Yes? Okay. Okay, once in my life, I met a person who had a perfect SAT score. He was a year older than me, got into Harvard. But meeting that guy, just like the way he says hello, you're like, whoa, that's a smart guy. Just the accent on hello was amazing, Okay, God, infinite, God does not learn. He didn't have a Homer Simpson moment after he created Adam and Eve and the world, and they listened to the snake, and he goes, oh man, what? That's not God. He doesn't learn. He knows everything. And one of the things that convinced me of the existence of God before I was a Christian, I was into more the science side of things, as you can kind of tell, but all the natural laws that we have, there's no person who established a natural law. We just stumble on them and discover them. That's all we do, through the scientific method of experimentation and observation. And a scientific law is exactly a concise description of a natural phenomena that's already happening, okay? But the fact that it's not random, it is not random. There are laws of physics, there are laws of chemistry, there are laws of biology, there are laws of geology, there's laws of mathematics on top of all that. And then when I looked at that, where do you ever have such order and laws without a lawgiver? And we're talking extremely complicated stuff, and some stuff that's so simple it's complex, if you know what I'm talking about. And we know that we have formulas for this because it's relative to where you are in space and time and heat and all that kind of stuff, but it's describable in mathematical terms so that we can send out space probes far from Earth, and those laws still govern what's going on out there. This is incredibly ordered. It is way more ordered than any kind of Swiss watch. It's way more complicated than anything in here. And this doesn't happen by accident. How much more God? Yeah. Who can give God any kind of insight or teach him anything? Verses 22 and 26, the greatness of God continues. Mind you, this is just like 4 verses we're looking at. Verse 22, it says, he sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. Verse 26, lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. The heavens, the stars, the universe. So many amazing things in the universe, estimated to be 30 billion light years across. How do you think about that? Speed of light, 186,300 miles per second, times 24 hours in a day, times 365 and a quarter, times 30 billion. How do you think of that? You can't. You can't even think of that at all. So let's make it a lot smaller, okay? From here to our closest star, the sun, a little over 92 million miles away, the sun, okay? We only have one star in our solar system, so that makes it kind of easy. The sun. If you were driving at a steady 65 miles an hour, which no one does in Utah, no one drives at 65, even down the streets in the city in Utah at 65. We love living here. Driving is the worst place I've ever been, except for Manila, the Philippines. But that's another story, okay? But if you were driving at a steady 65 miles an hour to get to the sun, okay, you would be driving. Now, mind you, we're not saying you stop for gas. I don't care if you got to go to the bathroom. We're not stopping. No food. We're on a straight trip because this is a long road trip, okay? That would take you 162 years at 65 miles an hour to get to the sun. And that's our closest star, the closest one. Wow. Now, how powerful is the sun? Well, we know, especially now that my hair is lacking, I could be out here just a couple minutes. At 92 million miles away, I get burned like I stuck my head in a microwave. Okay, you got to respect the sun, man. Okay, but it is 27 million degrees in the core of the sun. So if you could take a metal pin, if you could, and take it to the core of the sun and heat it to that temperature and preserve the heat all the way back to Earth, the head of a pin at the temperature of the core of the sun would cause everything within 60 miles to burst into flames. The heat from a head of a pin. Do you understand? This is just, and it's a dwarf star. It's a yellow dwarf. It's not even an impressive star, our sun. I mean, you understand? It's called a dwarf star. And greatness of God. Okay? Okay, so now we're also located, our little solar system is located in the outer spiral of our Milky Way galaxy. Okay? So you got solar systems, then you got galaxies, then you got the universe. That's kind of how it all works together. Okay? So our solar system is orbiting around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. We are moving around the center of the Milky Way at 515,000 miles an hour. How are we not just flying off? I mean, what's going on here? That's just amazing, okay? Now, the Milky Way, which is not the biggest galaxy by any means at all, okay? So we are moving at 515,000 miles around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. We do one orbit every 230 million years. That's how big the galaxy is we're in. I mean, what is that? And God just kind of clapped his hands and it happened. And everything actually follows all kinds of these laws we talked about, despite how huge it is, despite how powerful it is. Milky Way, we don't even know. It's at least 100 billion stars, probably up closer to 400 billion. We can't even count them. It says here every one of them has a name, and not one is missing. Frank, Bob, Charlene, 400 billion. They're all exactly in the right place. It's incredible, okay? Look over in Zechariah chapter 11. Now this will challenge all those with paper Bibles who haven't been in their Old Testament for a while. Where is Zechariah? Well, second to the last book in the Old Testament. Thank you. Cheating on her digital phone. Appreciate that. No, I'm just kidding. Try and find that in your paper Bible. No. Okay, another aspect of the greatness of God is beyond this physical stuff. It's that all history obeys his will. And this is what really convinced me that the Bible was inspired by God and that there was a higher being. It's prophecy that was specifically said in the Old Testament and went into fulfillment in the New Testament. And I was critical of this stuff. So I checked, what do we know for archaeological evidence that this Old Testament stuff wasn't written afterwards and kind of to fill in the blanks? And how do we know people didn't just live to fulfill the Old Testament stuff and kind of fake it and all that stuff? When you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls and many other archaeological finds, we know that, like the prophecy we're about to look at, this was written down 520 BC. Okay? And Zechariah himself, at the time he wrote it down, wasn't even sure what he wrote. He just claimed to be under inspiration of God. Zechariah 11, verse 12. And it's confusing, so I'll unpack it a phrase at a time here. I told them If you think it best, give me my pay, but if not, keep it. So they paid me 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the handsome price at which they valued me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them to the potter at the house of the Lord. Very bizarre, okay? Like I said, written 520 BC. There's some person here demanding that they get paid. And their pay was 30 pieces of silver. And then for some reason, when they got this pay, they were either frustrated with what they got, mad, something happened, and they took this and threw it to the house of the Lord, which for Jews, that would have been the temple in Jerusalem. This money got thrown back at the temple, and then somehow the same money ended up in the pocket of a guy who made pottery, the potter. Okay, 520 BC. Skip ahead 550 years to the life of Jesus in Matthew 27. And why I'm sharing this as part of the greatness of God is that He is the one who determines everything that's going to happen. He bends human history, universal history, to fulfill His plans. He's in charge of time and the flow of events. That's how great God is. Matthew chapter 27, remember what we just looked at in Zechariah. In verse 1, Jesus had been arrested and condemned to death. And He hadn't been crucified yet, but He was about to be. In Matthew 27, verse 1, early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people made their plans how to have Jesus executed. So they bound Him, led Him away, and handed Him over to Pilate the governor. When Judas, who had betrayed Him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. I've sinned, he said, for I betrayed innocent blood. What is that to us, they replied. That's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. The chief priest picked up the coins and said, it's against the law to put this into the treasury since it is blood money. So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why it's been called the field of blood to this day. You can't make that kind of stuff up. The guy who betrayed Jesus was actually fulfilling prophecy. And once he saw that Jesus was going to die, it still didn't dawn on him he's fulfilling any kind of prophecy. He goes and kills himself. Okay? Judas was the one who sold the Lord for 30 pieces of silver. Judas regretted that he did it. He literally walked back to the physical temple, like Zechariah said, tried to negotiate. They wouldn't let Jesus loose. He throws the money in. And what they do, they being so righteous, they go, we can't really use this in the treasury. We should make some kind of real estate investment. The potter, the guy who makes pottery, he's selling a piece of land. They literally picked up the coins that Judas just threw, went and paid the potter. Those exact coins end up in his pocket. 550 years later. Okay? There's estimated 300 prophecies about the Messiah in the Old Testament. The Old Testament brought me to faith in Jesus and the Bible, which is a little bit different, but that's how I came to faith. I was trying to tear apart the Bible and stuff like this you just cannot avoid. God is so great that even the amount of money for His betrayal, what would happen to the money, all the sequence of events, all this stuff is under the control of God. A couple days ago, I was riding my bike, and we can't even control events 5 minutes in our history, can we? Literally 5 minutes in our history. So I'm riding my bike on a bike trail, and there's one spot I had to cross the road. I hit the crossing thing, waited for the crosswalk signal, and then I proceed. After looking, I'm an experienced biker, and some guy gunned his large pickup truck, a dually, and nailed me, hit me. I go flying through the air, and luckily, if I'd have been 3 feet, he hit my back tire, and I just lifted my leg where my leg was, he'd have chopped my leg probably in half. And I go flying in the air, and I'm laying there in the street, and I'm like, I couldn't see that happening until 2 seconds before it happened. We are so locked in time, and we have so little control over so many things in our life. And yet the little bit we have control over, we try and grab a hold of, instead of trust this God who plans out things to this detail. How great our God really is. Well, why don't we see the greatness of God? Why don't we see it? Well, sometimes we don't want to. That's a reason for a lot of things that don't happen, right? Another reason is we have too great thoughts of ourselves. And the last is that we're burdened with too many of our own problems. Many years ago, Kim and I took a cruise from Stockholm up through the Baltic to Russia to St. Petersburg. And one of the things we did was tour the second largest art museum in the world. It's the Hermitage that St. Catherine, the great Empress of Russia at the time, she founded it like in 1764 or something like that. It has one of the most amazing collections of Rembrandt and Rubens and all these great painters, okay? But I'd had a few cups of very strong Russian coffee in the morning at breakfast. Okay, so this is an ancient building built almost 300 years ago. So bathrooms are few and far between. Okay, so I'm trying to, like, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see this incredible museum and these paintings. It's like, wow, so amazing, and wow, my bladder really hurts. Wow, and whoa, wow. So my bladder took over. I'm in one of the best art museums in the world. I'm like streaking past all these art exhibits, just through one wing after the. Finally, I find a bathroom like in, section J. I'm like, oh. And then I come out, and the tour guide says, time to get on the bus. I missed one of the greatest art museums in the world because of my bladder. We run around, and there's God of the universe right there looking at you. I'm right here. But you're concerned about your bladder. We could have a connection here. You could see some beautiful artwork if you just stop and take some time with me. But you're concerned about your bladder. You young people can't relate. Your day's coming. All right. You know what I'm saying? Okay, point 2, and we'll land the plane in about 2 hours. No, I'm just kidding. Carne asada is starting to rot. Don't worry, we'll let you go before it's contaminated. The personableness of God. The personableness of God. Open up to Luke. Luke chapter 8. So the personableness of God, it's an amazing thing that when we were reading in that passage of Isaiah 40 about these huge things with God and the limitlessness of God and the vastness of God and all that kind of stuff, there's also a verse in the middle of all that really, really big stuff where it says this of God. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. That's right before the verse we started with, who measured the waters in the hollow of his hand. In this very same chapter of Isaiah showing the greatness of God, he shows that God cares about every single sheep, every single person, personally carries them, personally knows when even one of them just got pregnant. He's aware of the ones that are carrying the young. This is the same God, the God who's incredibly personable. When men come up with pictures of God, they come up with like Zeus, who throws lightning bolts if he gets annoyed, or Jupiter, the Roman god. And they're always at a distance, Zeus being on Mount Olympus and you better not bother him, kind of a thing. He's impersonable. He's easily angered. He's not a personable God at all. The God that we have in the Bible could not have been made up by people. This is not what we normally make God great and distant and we're in fear. That's not the God we're running into here. Jesus, when he came to the earth, he came to save us, but he also came to show us God's character. In John 1:18, it says there, no one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, he himself, God, is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. One of Jesus' missions on earth was to show you this is God. He actually said later to Philip in John 14, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. I'm here to show you what God is all about. So he's not abstract, lightning bolt throwing guy on the top of a mountain. But you can see what makes God cry, what makes God laugh, what makes him angry, how he feels about every single person. Just look at me and you've seen God. And one of my favorite pictures of the character of God shown through the life of Jesus is this one in Luke chapter 8, in verse 40. Luke chapter 8 and verse 40. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman who was there had been subject to bleeding, internal bleeding, for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "No, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." What an incredible picture of the heart of God. Jesus he's surrounded by a crowd that says they're almost crushed him. It's like going to some great rock concert or some popular band concert, all those people around you. It's incredibly overwhelming situation. This guy Jairus comes up in an emergency situation, and he's a very important guy. He's the leader of the synagogue. So he was the Jewish leader at that place. And it was life and death. I have one daughter, and she's dying. Please come right now. This is a life and death situation. So Jesus is trying to make his way through the crowd. People are smashing all around him. And in the midst of this chaos, in the midst of this just din and probably the thunderous noise and everything, he felt just the slightest touch on the edge of his outer garment. He felt, whoa, 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 whoa. Somebody touched me. Now, do you really think that Jesus, being God, didn't know who it was? He knew who it was. He knew everything about her. He knew why she touched him. He knew the pain she'd been in. He knew how sick she'd been, how long she'd been sick, how many doctors she tried to see. He knew that she was spiritually unclean, according to Jews, and shouldn't even be touching other people in a crowd. And yet the shame and the stigma and all of that, the loneliness, he knew all of this, just that little touch. And he noticed it in a crowd where people are literally crushing all around him. He noticed that because she had faith and she had a need. That shows you the heart of God, the personalness of God. In the midst of this huge, chaotic world, you're pushed around. People don't always see you for who you are. At your work, you may or may not be appreciated for what you do. In your family, you might have a close family. Maybe you have a family that disowned you. Maybe you just moved here to Salt Lake City. You don't know anybody except a couple people in this pavilion. And you're wondering, well, this doesn't make sense at all. In the midst of that chaos and that huge crowd pressing all around, Jesus notices the least little touch in faith when you come. That's how personable he is. And he stops. He doesn't care about this girl dying because he can raise her from the dead. But your problem matters to him. Your problem matters to him. And he stops right there. One of my good friends in Sweden is a big Icelander named Johan. And many years ago, he led a pretty wild and crazy life. He was an actor and did a bunch of other things and has like a voice like you could hear on the radio. Really impressive guy. But he was also a ladies' man, and during one of his one nights out at the bar, he met some woman and got her pregnant in a one-night stand. She calls him up and says, "Hey, I'm pregnant." "Well, how do you know it's me?" "Well, I haven't been with anybody ever in my life before. You're the first and only guy." And he took a genetic test, and yeah, it was his child. And he had all kinds of plans in life, as you can imagine, and this was not one of them. And he was still rather young. So he found on the street some pamphlet about who Jesus was. And in this pamphlet it says how you can like pray to Jesus, and he always answers that kind of prayer. So he didn't believe anything. This guy was, like an atheistic Icelander. But for some reason he goes, "I'm desperate. I'll try anything." So he goes home, and he was still with his mom and dad, living there. It was hard to get an apartment in Iceland there. So he didn't want anybody to see him praying because he'd never prayed before. So he kind of closes. This is a big guy. He's like 6'5". So he closes the door, reads the pamphlet again, gets on his knees and lays the pamphlet on his bed and just repeats the prayer in the pamphlet. Okay? So a week later, he's back in London at acting school. It's the middle of the night. He's coming back from a session of doing some acting stuff. It's like close to midnight. He's in a part of London that's not the best, and he knows a shortcut through an alley, and since he's a big dude and he looks kind of imposing, he doesn't really care what people think. He just walks through the alley. This small woman of African-American descent comes up to this big white guy, okay? And just the fact that she came straight at him, he's like, "Whoa, what's..." And it's an alley, and it's a little woman in an alley, and not the best part. But what is this? What's going on? And she goes, "Hey, you look like you need to find God." Just what? He goes, what is this? And I'm on my way home, and I prayed that I'd meet somebody who's looking for God. And you're the only one here. She went to church that Sunday, began studying the Bible. He learned about his sin, how he had to repent, get baptized, all that stuff. He was a Christian within 2 weeks. Now? This is the personal witness of God. This guy wasn't even a Christian, and he was quite the pagan dude when he said that prayer. And he gets connected over in London in an alley. Okay? At the same time, that same week that he's praying, this woman who was an Icelander who had been studying in London was back on break in Iceland. Her name was Tota. And so she came back, and we were trying to figure out, was it the same day? We don't know if it was the same day. Was it definitely the same week? So she lands back in Iceland, and she had not been a Christian when she went to school. She became a Christian in London, didn't know anybody back in Iceland who was a believer at all. So she came back. Her whole family thought she was crazy because she believed in God. So she prayed like crazy, okay, God, help me to meet an Icelandic man who's a Christian who can come back and plant this church and become my husband. That's pretty specific, okay? What she didn't know is that Johan had that prayer that week. She goes back to London. This guy gets baptized 2 weeks later, and she meets him. They said, you got to meet this guy. He's another Icelander. I mean, how many are there? 330,000. About 330,000. That's all there are. Okay, so they get to meet each other. They fall in love. They got married, and they ended up planting the church back in Reykjavik. Wow. Okay, and there's some great Christians that they're now back in Stockholm. But so God listened to her. God listened to him. God saw all of this stuff, did whatever he had to do to orchestrate those kinds of things. God is a very personable God. Why don't we accept the personableness of God? Pride. We want to take care of everything ourselves. I'll tell you, when I was literally flying through the air on my bicycle, it's amazing what goes through your head even in a second or two when you're in that, seriously. And I'm like, I can control nothing. That's what I'm thinking. And this is going to hurt as I landed, and it did. But I literally thought I can control literally almost nothing. I can control food in my mouth. Maybe when I go to bed, I can't control if I'm going to see my next birthday. But we try to control everything in our lives. And I think God does a pretty good job of trying to beat your hands off the steering wheel. And if you're not a Christian and life has been a little bit rough, you might be wondering what's going on. Maybe you got somebody using a sledgehammer on your fingers on the steering wheel, trying to get you to let go of control. I think the other reason we don't accept the personableness of God is fear. We've been let down by so many other people who've disappointed us, who we had faith in them, we counted on them, even people that were very, very close, and they let us down. You've maybe been through a divorce. Maybe something happened in your family. Abuse stuff happens. All kinds of horrible things. Maybe somebody you love dearly went into an addiction of some kind. And it makes you just not believe anybody could be that personable or that caring at all. And so we project our fear onto God when he's never done any of those things. He's perfect and he completely cares for you. So just in closing here today, before the carne asada rots, the God who's there, who is among us right now, who knows everything about you, has counted the hairs on your head, has written all the days in your life in his book before one came to pass, and at the same time is sustaining every single star, asteroid, planet, every single being that's ever been, every plant and every human being. This God is both infinitely great and infinitely personable, and he's calling you to trust him. And I'm saying that to you who already claim you're Christians, and those of you who are not sure what you believe in, okay? Take some time to get to know this God through opening the Bible with a Christian and taking it in and then praying about what you read. You'd be surprised what can happen to you. This is the one who's giving you life and is keeping you alive right now. And he's calling you to give your life to him, but he also wants to do that so he can care for you. We're going to sing a song now to prepare our hearts for communion. And after that, Jeff is going to pray for communion for us. But before we do that, I just want to thank over here the masters of carne asada, secret salsa, Leno and Elena. I want to thank you so much. And despite that he loves his brothers and sisters in the church, they refuse to give the salsa recipe to anyone. It is secret beyond belief. And then Tony Varela was the orchestrator of the whole team. Where is Tony? Where there? Thank you so much. Let's stand and we're going to sing together a song, Prepare for Communion.